Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering What We Do in the Shadows, Season 2, Episode 7, The Return. In this episode, Simon the Devious is back, hiding in the sewer on some Phantom of the Opera type shit. And he just wants the same thing he has always wanted, and that is Laszlo's cursed hat. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Max for commissioning this episode. What's up, Max? So this one was a little bit frenetic. I feel like it was a tiny bit all over the place. There is nothing inherently wrong with that, but I have kind of grown to love their really encapsulated stories. And this one just felt like we just kind of wanted this dude to guest again. And so we created a scenario to make that happen, which I can't blame them for. Because Simon the Devious is, first of all, even without this actor, just such a great name that you, of course, want to just have him back. Secondly, the cursed hat thing is kind of an endless supply of gags. You know, I mean, there is just so much you can do with that. I think the strongest parts of the episode were definitely what's going on with Guillermo and, of course, Colin. What's going on with Colin? So let's start things off here. We begin with Laszlo and Nadja. They're leaving a movie theater and they're talking about how they just went to see a talkie, which it's always fun when you find out that they've been alive for hundreds of years, and yes, they've lived on Staten Island and had the opportunity to go see a movie for, at this point, 100 years, but they haven't really bothered because why would they? So the modern film and the way that they work is fairly new to them still, even though they should be used to it, but they just don't live like people. And I think that's the part that I enjoy the most about the way this show has decided they're going to handle being a vampire is we see a lot of stuff with vampires in other media when it's set in the present day, and they just kind of live as much as they can like regular people, either to keep up a facade or because they're genuinely interested in these human things. And Nadja and Laszlo, and apparently Nandor as well, have no real interest in just doing the ordinary shit that people do. And that, I think, makes them seem as weird as they are. Getting across that somebody isn't really a person is a tricky thing to do. And these reminders that they sort of just don't get it. And they don't have their finger on the pulse because time passes for them in such a way that it's like getting to my age. And I don't know who anybody at the Grammys is anymore, except for 5 artists out of the top 40 that they name, I just don't. None of this stuff is marketed toward my demographic anymore. None of this stuff is anything that I particularly have any interest in. The parts of my life that were the most high intensity emotion and high stakes in my mind are marked by a certain period of music. And as happens for most of us, we listen to music to feel certain things. And the music that makes you feel the most is usually music that you heard at formative times in your life. It's usually familiar. So going out and seeking new music is something I think a lot of people just kind of stopped doing. And that's not to say everybody, of course. There are people out there who are just into music and they're always like going to be out there looking because that's just sort of a hobby. But I think for the average person, music happens to them. And going out and like getting familiar with new stuff is just less of a thing. And that's sort of how I view this with them, is that, yeah, there have been movie theaters doing movies forever. They don't care. They went to talkies, and that was like their first experience at movies. And they were like, this is dope. What a great new thing. And that was their benchmark. And now, if it's not that, they're just kind of like, what even is this, though? Why? Which, honestly, you know, a lot of us are like that. So the whole like disdain that they both have for the fact that there's like all this pop music and people are talking really loud. At one point, Nadja says, or maybe it's Laszlo, why didn't they didn't even have subtitles so you don't know what anybody's saying? Which Rashawn and I were talking about this in a recent episode of Ted Lasso, that it's become such a problem, for me at least, to understand what is being said. And I actually went and found some articles about it because, as it turns out, I am not alone. There are a lot of folks who have issues with media recently and understanding the dialogue, because the mixing of the sound effects is so loud, or the music is so loud in comparison to the dialogue, that it drowns it out. So you have to watch certain things with subtitles, or else you just straight miss important information. And the articles that I read essentially suggest that the mixing of sound in movies becoming digital has made it so much easier to add a ton of sounds that a lot of sound designers go a little bit too far and too heavy with it. So they muddy it up because they add too many layers. Whereas in the past, this was something that had to be added manually, and it was a lot harder. So they would, be a lot more choosy about the sound effects, about the music. And it was just handled in such a different way. And also, we've got a movie that comes out in a theater, and then we have a movie that comes out on streaming. And then we have a movie that comes out on DVD. And depending on the streaming service, the quality is going to be different. And then there's movies that are not streaming, but you do download them from online. So it's still coming through like that format. And then you have to mix according to all of these different settings that are, and not always do they even bother. But it seems a lot of the time they try and make a separate mix for theaters versus a separate mix for listening at home. And the streaming service thing, unanimously, from what I was reading, is the hardest one to account for, because you lose so much integrity in sound with streaming. So anyway, all this to say, I thought it was just that I was losing my hearing, but it seems like this is a genuine problem that a lot of people deal with. And so not just like desire for subtitles, while not in the context of what I mean when I say that, I still agree with, and I'm on her side. So as they're walking around this corner here, they hear somebody calling Laszlo's name. And I love when Laszlo is just like, oh yeah, well, you probably can't hear this because it's only for like super excellent vampire hearing, so don't worry about it. But we can definitely hear it. There is something about the vampires are able to do truly impressive shit. Turn into bats, literally fly, like travel at warp speed. And yet they insist on trying to make certain things seem important that aren't. And I'm like, y'all should really lean a little bit more on how you can turn into a bat or fly. Although we haven't really revisited the fact that Nandor is not as good as Laszlo at mind controlling people, apparently. But I do find that particularly funny. So they go down into this sewer, even though they both find it quite disgusting. And we have this amazing moment. I love whenever they decide that they're going to be like, look at what utter drama queens these guys are. So we have them in this like sewer talking about how, why are we even down here? And the camera turns and there's like a streak that crosses the opening to this tunnel. And then when Laszlo turns again, we see another like weird huddled figure that scuttles away. And when we find out that it's like Simon the Devious, I was just going, wow, what is that? Because the huddled figure, it looks like he's wearing the Christian Siriano dress that Lizzo wore to the Emmys a couple of weeks ago, which that is a very specific reference, but I just look it up and you'll see what I mean. It looks like he's wearing that, but that he's like squatting, like crouched. And it's just full of like ruffles and this weird floaty sort of thing going on. And I just love the idea that he maybe just went and got a cloak that looks really good for scuttling. Like, if you're gonna scuttle, make it really like effective. I fully support this. Honestly, if you're gonna be a vampire and you take yourself that seriously, the way they all clearly do, and you're gonna be out here doing weirdo shit, leaning into the aesthetic of everything you decide to wear for what you're doing, makes total sense to me. And I mentioned before how funny I find it that like everybody still sort of wears clothing that is extremely antiquated and not appropriate for the period at all. And I think that's really meant to be based on like how old certain vampires are. Like, we meet obviously a bunch in Simon's crew, and they are not wearing clothes. We've got a rapping, what is his name? Rapula. And he's wearing like pretty modern street clothes. So this is not like a uniform thing that they do. But I wonder if that's what Nadja and Laszlo are doing. We never really like hear them specifically talk about why they wear what they do. But I would like it if it just turned out to be like, well, I mean, when you think of a vampire, like, what do you think of? I'm going to just kind of go with that. This is a fascinating thing for me always because of the way that in the Sookie Stackhouse novels, vampires sort of find it funny that they think that vampires are extremely partial to black and like real goth looks, when that's not necessarily true at all. So there will be people dressed like how we imagine a vampire would dress, but it turns out that's not a vampire. That's a fangbanger who's actually being kind of pitiful right now. But in this universe, it seems like they're just kind of going, no, I think I'm going to wear what I was like most comfortable with to begin with, and only update that very slightly with like new materials, etc. So they make their way towards the sound. Nadja is being held in front of Laszlo, and they eventually come out, and it's Simon the fucking Devious. And he has this like weird thing going on with his face. I can't tell if it's supposed to be that he was burned in the explosion that happened because his club burned down. But he, like I had said in the intro, is a really, he's doing a Phantom of the Opera thing down here really hard, where he's just, oh, I'm relegated here because of my misfortunes. And while our guys have had some, they had some involvement in the explosion in a way, also, it was really Simon's fault. He stole a cursed hat. The thing happened very much clearly because he was wearing it. So they're acting very nervous about it, but I just wanted to be like, reach in and be like, guys, don't worry about it. This is not on you. It's okay. So we cut from there to Colin, and this is just delightful. And I'm just going to jump ahead here and say there is a reveal that the person Colin winds up interacting with the most is an actual troll. And y'all, I should have seen that shit coming. I was watching the episode thinking that it was going to turn out he was going up against another energy vampire. It didn't occur to me that we were just going to do a straight up troll, which it should have, and I'm ashamed of myself. So he's here with like 6 laptops, apparently a ton of different usernames and stuff. And he is just going in and getting people involved in online arguments in order to drain their energy. And I felt really personally attacked by this. Listen, there was no need to go this hard, okay? I know. It's a waste. It's pointless. Why do it? Because it's so hard not to, you guys. It's so hard. I've become a lot better. I really have, at like walking away, kind of taking a moment and realizing I am about to write a furious reply to a man I don't know, who does not know me, who has a MAGA hat and an assault rifle in his profile picture. And I know I'm not changing his mind. That's just not happening. I know that he is enjoying fucking with me, and I'm giving him what he wants. And yet, I will still do it. It's so sad. It really is. And it's sad for me as much as it is sad for the man doing it, because he may like getting a rise out of people, and that is pathetic. But I'm falling for it for like the most childish reasons. And that is honestly kind of more pathetic. And I've just recently begun to sort of step back and look at the number of times it happens to me where I get tempted to be drawn in. It is wild, you guys. Like, I can say at least 5 times per hour if I'm like on Facebook consistently throughout the day. I start to get really intense in a conversation that doesn't need it. Like I said, I've gotten better. I really have. Especially, like, there are times where stepping up and saying a certain thing is super necessary. It's necessary for the person who's saying it to hear it, and you can sort of sense if they're going to be open to what you're saying or not. It's necessary for other people who are in the comments looking around to see that there's a person defending them if they're of the party that might be being targeted. And that's all fair. But mostly, that's not really what's happening when I do it. Usually, I am part of a group that is all going after this guy. And if I weren't here, it would not change a thing. So those are the times where I really do have to like back up and be like, there are 200 other people who are ripping this guy to shreds. I don't need to do this. I don't have to. So this whole thing, what he's doing is he's going out here and like disagreeing with an astrophysicist on purpose because he likes it when people talk about him mansplaining. And he says something and we don't actually get to see what it is, but somebody replies to him with "that's racist," and he just says, yes, it is racist. And just the way they decided to handle that, I really love that we don't get to see what he said because we're not trying to inflict that on the viewer. But we can probably get the idea without seeing the specific thing and get the point across of what he's doing without that part, you know? And that was what I thought was a nice, like, they struck this balance between giving us really good examples of the kinds of people online that make you crazy without ever actually, like, having him say something truly offensive, like objectively. It's always the kind of thing that it would be offensive in context, like him correcting an astrophysicist about how space works. And I really do like that he starts it with "actually," and I love that he just says, "Now I just have to wait." And the number of replies that he gets is so high. And all of these accounts that he has got set up, he says the energy you get this way isn't quite as pure, but if you do enough of it, it'll fill you up. And that was a really interesting thing for me. This is essentially like junk food. Like, he is saying, if you have a bag of Cheetos, that's not a meal. But if you eat like 5 bags of Cheetos, you're not going to be hungry anymore. And I love that even for him, this isn't great. This isn't really like what he really should. It's sort of him doing like a binge in his room because he doesn't feel like going out. So he just grabbed whatever, you know, and I relate. It's just fun to see what the equivalent of junk food is for an energy vampire. He says Jesus actually hates horses, which was one of my favorites. I don't know what that means, but I love it so much. And then he says, when they call you a dumbass, that's when you've got them. Oh, I take it back. My very favorite was women are getting too tall. Women are getting too tall is so believable as a thing that dudes would say. Like, that is a little bit too close. Like, that's the kind of thing where I'm like, did somebody say that and they're just like using this because it's so absurd, because it feels real. Anyway, so he's in the midst of that, and we go back to Simon the Devious, who is doing this big sob story about how after he lost everything, almost nobody is left from his crew, and he is so sad having to set up shop down here. And I love how he says something about how Rapula pre-writes his raps and pretends they're freestyled, which is really very cutting. And Rapula is just sort of like, he doesn't even defend himself. He's just sort of like, yeah, well, you know. And this is when we get the introduction to Carol. Now, this is something I really want more information about. And I don't think we're going to get it, and that's totally fine. But what is it with some vampires looking a certain way? And I'm talking about Master that they had at the like very beginning of the show, that Guillermo, that was like the first one that he ever killed, I think. Or maybe it wasn't. But he looks like a Nosferatu. He's a real old school type vampire. Then we've got the vampire assassins that Guillermo is like taking care of, who were trying to get into the house after the crew managed to get out of the punishment that they were supposed to be like put in the sun, right? In that little hole. And all of those vampire assassins look the same. They all were like bald with pointy, there's almost something elfin about them. They look like they're young Nosferatu, essentially. And then this bitch, Carol, has these teeth that almost look like some kind of undersea creature. They jut out and interlock in a way that is just very upsetting. And she has these bulbous white eyes, also very reminiscent of some underwater creature, or even kind of like insect-like. And there is no reference to like why the fuck she looks like this, but I really want to know what choices vampires have to make in order to begin looking like they are not human at all. They're like, you wouldn't walk by this woman on the street and just go, oh, well, she has some kind of deformity. She has some kind of disability. It's very clearly a lot more than that happening here. Nosferatu, same. Like when you were passing him on the street, you would just be like, what the fuck? And probably assume he was like in heavy makeup or something. I'm assuming with her you probably would as well. But you would assume makeup because there is no person who just looks like this. So what happened? And the fact that she is the only one that seems able to tell that Guillermo is a vampire killer, I think has to have something to do with it. Like, is it just that she's so old that she can tell? And that's part of why she looks this way as well? That it's sheer age, and the experience that comes with age makes it so that she's a lot more sensitive to being able to tell when somebody is a vampire killer. Like, I don't know, but the introduction of her, she is so creepy. And the way it continues to go, and they have her like moving in a way that feels very inhuman. So creepy. I hated it so much. So, long story short, Laszlo starts talking about how he started wandering the sewers, eventually connected with Carol, who's been great, and then found Rapula by sending him psychic messages. You emailed me, and I emailed him as well. And now it is to my great shame that you find me here. And Nadja says in the sewers, and he corrects her to in Staten Island, which was truly very well done. And they invite him, Nadja invites them to come by the house if they feel like it. You're welcome anytime. Laszlo is in the middle of being like, what the fuck? Nadja, why did you invite him? What are you doing? And she's like, dude, he's living in a sewer. Okay, I felt sorry for him. Forgive me. He's not coming. He's going to be too embarrassed. And they get to the house and open the door, and he is literally already here. I mean, they all just don't really like this guy. He's a prick. So the fact that these dudes, they say, we took the sewers, of course. It's a straight shot to get here. So I'm just dying. Like, did they just come out of a manhole on the street? I have to assume. And he's doing this whole bit here. First, we have Carol, who seems to want to eat Guillermo. And even Simon is kind of like, wow, Nandor, you're not eating him? Like, how do you not eat this guy? He's right here. And Nandor says, at first it was hard to resist, but then you sort of reach a point where you're like, well, why has nobody eaten him yet? Like, he's like the last donut in the box, which is so insulting, but also kind of saving Guillermo right now. So I'm like, I don't know how to feel about that. And Carol, despite this, is still pretty insistent, so they have to warn her off a couple of times. And she gets down on the ground at one point and is like trying to like scuttle toward him like on the ground. Oh my God. When Simon says do not eat, he follows it up with something wrong. So that's the start of this whole thing. Then we go to the discussion about the cursed hat. Nadja, of course, does not realize that Laszlo went to the hospital room and took the hat back. And he has it in the house upstairs. So what he thinks is going on is that Simon is purely here to steal the hat back, which turns out to be correct. And I had to assume that he was right about this because Simon's entire demeanor was too pathetic. He is just such a maniac. I don't see him, even if he fell on hard times like this, he would never be pathetic publicly. He would be trying for all he was worth to save face. So all of this, I was just like, yeah, what is he up to? The hat thing, I was like, that's as good a reason as any. My instinct was, really? And then I was like, oh, right. But these two are like fucking weirdos about that hat. So he's following, oh my God, Simon is running down the hallway in this like gold cloak, prancing and looking over his shoulder, luring Laszlo to follow him. It was too much. And then he has something that he has sort of like hidden behind his back. And rather than Laszlo demanding to see it immediately, he assumes that what is under this little like napkin or whatever it is the hat. So he brings him in front of everybody to show off what he was trying to steal. And he doesn't say what it was. He just says he was trying to steal the most precious thing from me, which Nadja, of course, interprets as he was trying to steal me away from you. And I was like, oh, girl, I love you, but not now. So he uncovers it, and it turns out to be a paper mache and clay bat with sort of like sequins on it, I guess. I made it myself from sewer trash. It's just a small gift to say thank you. And when he says that, Guillermo nods like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. And he puts a hand over his mouth because obviously this thing stinks really bad. And this whole thing, I just wanted to say thank you for not abandoning me when everyone else had. Again, so like pitiful. It was just obviously something was up. So Laszlo has to apologize, which he has to do like several times before they will let him slide, because he won't say it loud enough for anybody to hear. So let me go to Guillermo. He's around here doing his usual little, his duties as a familiar. And he turns to head down the stairs, and Carol is at the bottom of the stairs in her weird pose that she does where she's on the ground, hissing. And Guillermo says, she startled me, I'm so sorry. And then he turns and she's right there in a pretty good, like, jump scare moment. And she says, I know what you are. And he's like, what does that mean? And she says, you are a slayer. And Guillermo, what? Why do you say that? And she says, I smell the death on you. Oh, that's just my body spray. That's Axe. So he tries to say, no, I'm going to be turned. I will be a vampire like you one day. But she jumps at him, and he goes plummeting down the stairs, which only briefly draws Colin's attention. He has a moment where he wants to get up and like investigate, but the troll is like getting to him, so he gets his attention pulled right back and sits down again. So this is when she really starts trying to attack Guillermo in earnest. And he has a broom. At first he just tries to hold up the broom part toward her, but she does a sort of karate chop motion, which cuts it in half, making two very good stakes. And he accidentally, and I put that an asterisk there, he winds up staking her from the sides. Like, that is not something that I have really seen before, and I'm sure that it's in things, but it was like a new novel way to do it. So he would have pierced her heart from like the left and right, I guess. And the pile of dust that she makes on the floor is still sitting there when Nandor comes out. And at first I thought Nandor was just going to be really, really dumb and not get what was happening. Because he thinks, if he first makes the suggestion that Guillermo is trying to make a girlfriend out of dust. And instead of thinking that is pathetic, he says it is a very messy but cool idea. Reminds me of Carol. You know, how she's kind of that shape and that smell. Guillermo, did you kill Carol? And I was like, oh, word? He's just gonna get it. He's just getting it that he killed Carol. I wasn't expecting that. I thought it was just going to be sort of played off and there would be this weirdness. And he's like, dude, you killed a vampire. Like, you have to know that is frowned on. And Simon is really not going to like that. And he says, you don't say anything about this to anyone because it reflects badly on me and you will be killed. And jokingly calls him vampire killer. And then only joking, clean it up. And as he says, clean it up, and Guillermo replies, yes, sir, he pulls his hands forward and both of the ends of the sharpened, broken broomstick hit Nandor in exactly the spot where his heart is. And we get a beautiful moment of both of them very slowly backing away from one another, which I love because Nandor has taken Guillermo extremely lightly. He does not think about him. He does not care about him. And even though it's probably bad news for Guillermo to be seen as a threat in this way, I have to assume it is only going to give him a measure of respect that he has not been experiencing up until now. I feel like this can only be a good thing. And maybe I'm like, a little bit too optimistic. That's fine. Maybe so. But anything is better than the way he's been treated, which is like I was going to say like a pet, but no, like not even, because people love their pets and nobody cares about Guillermo. It's so much worse than that. So I was pretty excited that we're moving things up to the point where Guillermo is, where Nandor is aware of what Guillermo is doing. And not doing, at least what he did here. He doesn't know about the other stuff. I feel like this is kind of a turning point. And we'll see how this develops, but I'm pretty excited about it. So then we go to Colin, and he is heading out here to try and face off with this guy. I love that he is so distracted talking about this and how mad he is as he's like, engaging with the camera, that he like trips and slides down the front steps of the house and talks about all of the things that he did to trace back where this guy is at the moment. And eventually he admits that the dude also just gave him the address that he's at right now and was like, hey, why don't you just come fight me if you want to so bad? So he gets into a Lyft or an Uber and he drains the driver too far to the degree that the guy actually passes out, and Colin leans over and presses on his knee so that he's like got the steering wheel in one hand and he's controlling the gas with the other, which I found so funny. Like, just the idea that maybe Colin like does this every time. And he says when he does this, okay, I'm going to go a little bit faster here. So I like the idea that he's draining on purpose because he wants to take control of the vehicle. And that's purely why. It's not just to eat. So there is a house meeting where Simon is asking, first says, I want to thank you all for having us. And I also am kind of wondering where Carol is. Has anybody noticed where Carol has gone? And he assumes that Carol has abandoned him. And Guillermo apparently gives like this sort of sense of relief, which he interprets as Guillermo just being relieved because she wanted to eat him. So it makes sense, which it's a pretty good interpretation. Why not? She really did not like you. I don't know why. Probably because he is such a downer. Yeah, I noticed that. So then comes the point where he asks, where is the hat? And Laszlo is like, I fucking knew it. The way that he transforms when he says it, just the intensity of it, he feels like a stage villain. It is so over the top. It is so goofy. And he says, I want that hat. And Laszlo says, which hat? This hat? And he like does the vampire speed thing and leaves and disappears and then comes back and he has it on. And this is, of course, the first time that Nadja realizes that Laszlo still has it. So she is disgusted by this turn of events. And Simon tries to say you gave it as a gift. And Laszlo is like, the fuck I did. I was forced to give it up. And Simon's like, I'm going to take it. And he darts forward with his vampire speed and he grabs it and then hits the front door at full speed, going flat on his back because of the curse. Laszlo shoots an arrow at him, which he catches, but it goes through his hand, as it turns out, which is not exactly what he was hoping for. And again, it's the cursed hat. So Laszlo sneaks up behind him and takes it. And then we get the two of them fighting out in the street until finally Laszlo gets hit by a car. And we get this really goofy CGI. I know it's like bad CGI, but the thing that makes it funny is that it's bad CGI. Does that make sense? Like, I felt like this scene was better because of how goofy the CGI was done. This was just, it was so video gamey. Something about it. I don't know. So he gets hit by like 6 or 7 cars and just winds up sort of bouncing from the hood of one car to the windshield of another until he eventually lands. The hat falls off. Simon grabs it. And then the two of them both turn into bats and begin to fight. And as they are fighting, they go over to one of the sewer grates and disappear down there. At this point, we go back to Colin Robinson. And he has shown up, I think he's in like Massachusetts or Cape Cod. He's somewhere far away because it's dark by the time he gets here. And he walks up to this internet cafe, the address that this guy gave, intending to start some shit, and sort of has a moment where he stops and is like, wait, what am I doing? This is just some poor schmuck. Why am I here? I'm not doing this. I gotta get out. So he turns around and starts to walk away, and then he gets a message. He DM'd me. I know you're here. Meet me in the alleyway, you loser. And he turns the corner, thinking that he knows what he's getting into. And we hear this thudding, and then an actual troll walks out of the shadows. And this thing, I would put it at like 10, 11 feet. He is a big boy. And he has a pixelated dick that is about a third of his overall height. Which, once he turns to stone, it is no longer pixelated. And I was really curious about that. Like, is this because he's technically could be seen as like a piece of art and you don't have to pixelate it if it's art now that he's not alive and walking around? Because it definitely felt like that was a specific thing happening there. So then we go down into, again, the shit pipe, as Nadja is calling it. She's using echolocation, which just sounds hilarious. And they discover these two bats still down there fighting. And we get a sort of back and forth between the scene of them dealing with them in the shit pipe and Colin Robinson. And Colin Robinson, first the troll, like, says how he finds the term trolling to be offensive. And Colin is like, well, you don't really get to decide what it means. If you need me to look it up in Webster's, I can go and do, and it's great. This is how these kinds of arguments always go, is that there is somebody trying to explain what a word has meant historically, like what a word has been used to imply and how it has been weaponized against certain people. And then there is going to be a person who insists that's not what it means because the website Webster's does not say that it means that. So nobody means it when they use it that way, which is just not really how language works. But it is like white people, for example, love to claim reverse racism is real and then screenshot the definition of racism and like try and say, see, what we're experiencing because we're being targeted because of our race is racism, even though the targeting is not what's happening here, but they really feel like they're winning the argument by doing this. So this little moment is just such a perfect like microcosm of how this sort of thing goes. And my being a troll is not related to the term online trolling. But when you're a troll and you troll, then you're trolling. So then we have the bat battle, which we have DJ Rapula making some sort of flappity flap rhyme, which is very bad. And each of them sort of slamming in and out of their bat forms. At one point, Laszlo gets shoved into like a sort of, I don't know if it's a generator or just, but he gets electrocuted. It's quite severe, to be honest. And then Simon is like, you fell right into my trap because I actually do have my entire crew. And all of these people just sort of appear out of nowhere. Our newer members, Neil, Patrick, and Harris, which is a really dumb joke. And he is standing there really proud of himself. I completely forgot this earlier. But when they were touring the house, we find out Laszlo turned Elvis. And those of you who have read Sookie Stackhouse know that this is a thing in those books. So I really enjoyed this joke just for what it was. And then it turns out that Laszlo has him like hiding and like making demo tapes. You still like, it's just a very, he's in the Sookie Stackhouse books, he is not entirely aware of who he used to be. And he's not really with it because he was like so drugged when he was turned that it didn't go quite right. So here he is fully aware and seems to be like kind of enjoying the notoriety of it. And Simon throws it in Laszlo's face that he has Elvis as part of his own entourage at this point. I kept wondering about like finding this Elvis impersonator and how much fun this must have been as a role. Like, cause you know, being an Elvis impersonator is like, it used to be a lot more of a thing, I would suspect, than it is today, but it's a thing people do. And getting to actually be in a movie and do a little cameo outside of like the actual biopic that was made about Elvis is probably so much fun. And a show like this that's like straight up comedy, that's got to be like extra fun. So he comes out and is like, hey man, it is what it is. And is very sort of chill about it. And then they ask Simon, what is it you want? What are you even after? And he says, I want what Laszlo has. What you and Nadja have. You have each other, and that is true love. It's enough. You're willing to settle. And I envy that. And then goes on to talk about how nothing satisfies him anymore. That having this crew isn't as fulfilling as it used to be. And that some of them, he doesn't even know who they are. That guy, I don't even know him. Look at my ex-accountant, Ken the zombie. And he just says, ah. And Simon says, ah, indeed, Ken. And the delivery of that line took me out. I don't know why that one got to me so bad. But there was something about the resignation in his voice and the sort of sense of like, of course you're going to say that. Fucking zombie, that I found really funny. So Nadja says, you don't need this fucking hat, though. It, first of all, is too big for you. And secondly, it has a huge curse. What are you doing? And he says, well, it makes me want it a little bit less, but still I mostly want it. And then he looks down and it says, my foot seems to have fused with this grating I'm standing on from when I turned into a bat. And we see that like the shoe, it's like the metal is going through the part of the shoe where your ball of your foot would be. And he's trying to like pull it off. And the two of them are like, you know what? Just keep the hat. We're going to take off. That looks really horrible. And then all of a sudden he falls entirely through the grating. And he is standing in this like pit of grime. It's like a bathtub size thing. And he wants his crew to help him get out of this. But after what he said about all of them not being enough for him, nobody wants to help him anymore. And so he begins to sink. Now, it's unclear to me exactly what's happening here, because he keeps sinking as if there's no bottom to this thing. I don't even know what it is that he was supposed to have been standing on. I don't get the feeling that this is like acid exactly. I know it's supposed to be part of the curse of the hat, but I don't really get exactly what the threat is. And then he says something about, where's Carol? I need Carol. And this whole time Nandor has been like thinking he's helping out by deflecting the suspicion from Guillermo, but has been very clearly making Guillermo seem more and more suspicious, actually. So he says, in response to where's Carol, Guillermo didn't kill her. And Simon doesn't even say, well, then he clearly did. He says, why would you phrase it like that? And Nandor is like, see how I got suspicion off you? And he's like, no, you put it on me, which I appreciated that Guillermo is just going to actually contradict him here, because he doesn't do that all the time. So then Guillermo says, is he going to drown in there? And Nandor says, why are you so interested in how vampires die? And Guillermo says, I'm not. I was just asking a question. And we have Nandor sort of stalk away while staring at him. And then we cut back to Colin Robinson, who is doing this long, drawn-out apology. He is trying to simultaneously pull this guy's energy out and keep him outside so that he will be turned to stone by the sun. And it does appear to have worked. So the sun comes up. This guy seems to have turned to stone. Colin is smirking and sort of just goes, sorry, Freddie Mercury, but I am the champion. And he puts his fists in the air in a moment of victory, and he begins to walk away. And the troll, even though he is still a stone, somehow manages to grab him by the wrists and lock him in place. I do not know how this is happening, but I really like that at the end the troll still gets the last word, because that's usually how trolling works. If you're dealing with a real troll, they will continue to provoke you, and it's up to you to disengage, which we don't, which is why it works. So I thought that was actually a pretty good way to end that, because just being able to defeat him and walk away, oh, I wish. Wouldn't it be great if that was how this worked? So yeah, this obviously, Simon the Devious is going to be back again. They keep doing things with him so that he winds up put off for a time, but not actually dead. Even though the explosion, I could assume he was dead, and I may have, but also the way that like vampires manage to survive practically anything is a time-honored tradition, so I should have known better. But yeah, I am fully expecting to see Simon the Devious back again. Of course. And this cursed hat, like I said, is just an endless source. There is so much you can do with that. Just doing cursed stuff is always good, because you could have the curse manifest in any sort of way. In this one, it's just sort of a bad luck curse. Anything that you do is going to go wrong. But then you can have curses of all kinds of types. Ones that I've read about, there's one I think in Harry Potter where somebody just speaks in rhyme for the rest of their life. There's one in the Stormlight Archive series where everything appeared upside down to him, and he had to get used to it all being upside down forever. Just that kind of thing where you could do all sorts of stuff. And I've been thinking a lot about how this series we've got werewolves, we've got vampires, we had a Babadook show up. We've had ghosts, we've had zombies, we had a warlock who managed to raise zombies. And we have this hat made of witch skin, but I don't think we've actually met a witch. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I would like to. I'd like to meet a witch. I don't remember, and if anybody wants to remind me, what happened to the crew that Guillermo was rolling with for a time there? The ones that were mosquito hunters or whatever they called themselves. Because he was part of their whole thing, and then shit went very left for them. I guess it's implied that because they actually dealt with real vampires and people died, that they just sort of gave up, which doesn't seem out of line for me. But I'm wondering if Guillermo is ever going to encounter anyone else who is also a vampire slayer, because this isn't something that he chose. He has the blood, and that's just a thing he doesn't seem to have any control over. Are there others? And are they actually working in this field? Is he going to connect with them? Because these were amateurs who just knew vampires were real and wanted to take matters into their own hands. But that's a very different thing from somebody who is apparently gifted with these abilities. So I'm kind of fascinated to see whether or not this continues to develop, because Guillermo, it has progressively gotten more intense how much he is almost killing everybody all the time. How little shit he's been willing to take lately. He's a lot more angry and less resigned than he used to be. And now the fact that Nandor has his eye on him, I am just very excited. I really want to see what we're going to do with this. And yeah, I think that's about it. So fun episode, a little bit all over the place, but the troll thing is just also so good. So I'm not mad at that at all. I do enjoy that Colin always has his own thing going on. Like most episodes, he isn't involved in whatever the rest of the crew is involved in. If he is at all, it's just at the very beginning, and he'll sort of make a weird comment and then vanish from the scene, and he'll have his own thing. And I feel like that must be a lot of fun. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap up, but thank you again so much to everybody for listening. Thank you to Max for commissioning this. Thank you to Asher for hanging out in the chat. And I hope that you guys are enjoying the coverage. I'm looking forward to the next one, which I think is coming up really shortly. A week from today, we're going to do the Collaborations, season 2, episode 8. I'm excited. All right, guys, until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.